We have a very exciting episode here in store as we're breaking down the top 32 of the recently released final rankings from elite prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we are presenting the culmination of this year's work. They're scouting for elite prospects, as I was the USHL scout. And while there are no USHL players that crack the top 25 in our final rankings, we're going to be breaking down the full first round here on today's episode. The draft guide is now available and free to read if you have a premium subscription. And if you don't, now is the time of year where it is most worthwhile for elite prospects. The link will be in the description down below if you want to go check it out, but you don't need to. And this is also one of the reasons I like doing this in podcast format, is that if you don't have a subscription, you can still understand some of the reasoning behind these rankings. So in the first segment, we'll be going through the top 10, the big boy names, and then we'll move on to the 11 to 20 range, and then we'll wrap it up with picks 21 through 32. And on the next episode that should be coming out tomorrow, I'll be breaking down the biggest hidden gems outside the first round alongside notable fallers, as well as big upside swings that could be very valuable options for your team on draft day. So that's the outlook here for the show today, and let's just dive straight into the episode here. I hope that you can make yourselves comfortable, grab something to drink, and just enjoy the show. And for the first pick, we really can't just talk about one player. We have to be talking about two, because by year's end, it was pretty clear among our scouting staff that Michael Misa and Matthew Schaefer were the two players in contention at number one on our board. And Matthew Schaefer did hold down that spot up until here, our final rankings. He is our number one player in this year's draft class. The upside is phenomenal. We were thinking players like Rasmus Dahlin or Miro Heiskanen in terms of possible impact, staple number one defenseman that changes the flow of the game when he's on the ice, and that is worthwhile at number one. But Michael Misa is beyond a consolation prize at second overall, a true first overall caliber player in this year's class, player who can do everything in the offensive zone and reminds us a lot of Macklin Celebrini in how he processes the game, how dangerous he is off the rush. Even that skating ability it really grew significantly over the course of the season. He brings pro level details, high end defensive work rate, and above all, real skill in the offensive zone. This is a deceptive, manipulative play creator who has a wicked shot and is probably an even better playmaker than he is a goal scorer. So if that's your pick at number one, I don't think that you can go all that wrong either, but we still did go with Schaefer at first overall. Moving on, we have Porter Martone at third overall. And this might surprise a couple people because seemingly Martone is falling a bit more into that 5 to 7 range in many rankings at the moment. And instead, he's rising to number 3 on our board. But it's the upside with this player. There's still a lot that he has to put together in terms of creating dynamic offense on a regular basis and using his physicality to his advantage to create little advantages where he can, rather than just exploding for big penalties and game misconducts. When that physicality does erupt, it is just way too much, and it doesn't help his team. If anything, it can set his team back. So a lot that still has to be rounded out in this player's game, but these areas that have to be worked on are also exciting to us because he's going to evolve into potentially a much more dominant player, and a player who brings so much skill and handling and playmaking ability. The goal scoring is also quite good. There's so much to like with Porter Martone, and he's toolsy, he's big, and he has a lot of runway. He's our third overall player. At number 4, we have James Hagens, a player who's fallen a couple of draft slots here, but it's more that he's been overtaken by other players rather than having really nosedived in his own performances. This is still a player who can dominate shifts. We just didn't see it all that regularly this season at the college level. He definitely had some growing pains there, but still, like last season, he was among the most dominant players in all of junior hockey, and he's doing that as a D-1 player, leading the NTDP as their by far top scorer, and overall just being a fascinating and fantastic transition player, really deft playmaker, so much skill. I think that this is also a player that you could very easily select at third overall. I just think that Schaefer and Misa have taken those steps that are a little bit ahead of where Hagens is at right now. Moving on at number 5, we still have Roger McQueen. Maybe a contentious ranking because this is a player that I know a lot of NHL teams have doubts about as well in terms of that injury record, but he seems to have a fully clean bill of health at this stage, and the skill, the dynamic handling ability, the playmaking creativity, the goal scoring ability, the motor, the skating ability at that size, and the physicality that he's been showing both before and after the injury. So much to like with this player, and the upside is among the very highest in this year's draft class. So this ranking reflects that potential rather than necessarily us having seen like that elite level entirely this season. We've seen it in glimpses in certain games, but of course that injury came and interfered in a big way. But if he's healthy, if also it's an injury that seemingly has a lot less of a risk of like being re-aggravated, this is definitely a player that I think deserves some consideration at the very least around 5th overall. Moving on, Jackson Smith at number 6 from the Tri-City Americans, a very mobile defenseman who we've adored this season, not only in terms of his physical rush defending, again, elite level skating, but also the amount of runway he has in terms of developing the offensive side of his game. He wasn't surrounded with all that much talent with the Tri-City Americans this season, and he was showing at the end of the campaign that he really can activate with dynamism and gift, and he was able to score 9 goals, I believe, in his last 11 regular season games this season after scoring 1 for the whole year prior to that. A player really took a lot of steps in the offensive and activation realm this season, and we really do see like potential as a top pairing player at the NHL level if the tools carry him all the way. At number 7, we have Caleb Desnoyers of the Moncton Wildcats, a player who has shown all year long how big of a competitor he is. He's a very physical playmaker, a guy that's able to play with real pace, make quick decisions under pressure. And when I watched him live as well, I was astounded by just how quickly he was making mature plays. A player who just ticks like an NHLer already. And on top of that, he has this growing physical frame, a really blossoming physical game, playing inside contact, not needing all that much space to operate in, and overall just being a very dependable and reliable two-way center who I think could really solidify a second line at the NHL level for a very long time and might not need all that long to get to that level. At 8th overall, we have Carter Bear of the Everett Silvertips, the hardest working player in this year's draft class, the motor that never stops, and a player whose playmaking, creativity, and deftness and precision just continuously left us impressed this season. A guy who just plays the game the right way. He plays it with intuition, with effort, and with creativity, and just consistently was able to make high-level decisions and apply pressure incessantly. And he's a guy I think who's just going to be like a heart and soul, like the beating heart of his line in a top 6 capacity at the NHL level. And he's finishing at 8th on our board, even in spite of that injury that he had, the lacerated or the partially lacerated Achilles, but he's already skating again. And I talked about this on the episode where I broke down his game. If you want to check that out, that's going to be linked in the cards up above for a full scouting report on Carter Bear. But at 9th overall, we have Victor Eklund of Djurgården IF in Hockey Allsvenskan, played a very big role in getting them promoted to the SHL for next season. And it's been his second season where he's contributed at the professional level. He did so as a D-1 as well last year, playing some really important minutes down the stretch. And he's a guy that, a bit like Carter Bear, just brings incessant energy down the wing and pairs that with real standout skill as a playmaker, as a goal scorer, as an inside-driven offensive player. has the hands to keep up with his feet, very intelligent, makes quick decisions under pressure, very projectable kind of player who might even exceed the precedent set by his brother there in San Jose. But to wrap up the top 10, we have of the Brantford Bulldogs, Jake O'Brien, a skilled playmaking center who's constantly trying to open up defenses through high-end handling ability, very gifted playmaking, and a real desire to slow the play down in order to find a precise pass to just like untie everything and to create offense. And he's going to have to operate at higher paces at the next level. And this was a big concern for us in our debates here in our final meeting in terms of where does he land between 10th overall and 15th overall. And he was going up and down a little bit because we have concerns about that pace. We have concerns that this is a very junior style creator at this stage, but also has this elite level skill, could really raise that ceiling, especially if he's drafted by an NHL team that gives him a lot of patience and support through his development. And in the end, we sided more towards the upper end of that range that we had set out for him because the upside is just such a standout feature in his game. But that wraps things up here for our first segment. In the next one, we're going to be discussing players like Justin Carbonneau, Brady Martin, and Anton Frondell. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts, with each 1 ounce serving having 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keeping you feel fueled for longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for my busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell variety are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs the protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's keep this episode rolling here in the second segment, breaking down the top 32 of our final rankings at Elite Prospects. So much work was put into this. We have over 5,000 game reports on players eligible for this year's class that you can read entirely there in the draft guide, which again is linked in the description down below. It will be massively a support to both myself, the channel, and the Elite Prospect Scouting team if you could go and give that a read, because again, so much work was put into that, and it's the most comprehensive breakdown of this year's draft class that you're going to find out there in the public. But to kick off the second segment, we have at 11th overall another player with elite level skill, a guy who could really end up in redrafts much higher than where we have him. So there's a little bit almost of a concern internally for us of, do we have him too high? Do we have him too low? Because there is some element of risk here. But Justin Carbonneau of the Blainville-Boisbriand Armada is a player with elite level hands, excellent skater, real level of power in his game as well when he really wants to. And on top of that, brings standout goal scoring in terms of shot quality and the heaviness of his release, the versatility of his shooting arsenal, and also has really great hands. So brings all of these offensive tools to the table. Definitely requires a bit of projection in terms of the habits, but he's shown in moments this season, especially when he's been taken out of that Blainville environment where he hasn't had to do everything offensively, that he can play a checking role. He can adapt to different situations. He's not just a player that is constantly calling for the puck on his stick, almost hounding his teammates to get him the puck over and over again, shift after shift, but instead playing a much more cohesive role and supporting his line mates a lot more proactively. So definitely a player who has top 6 upside, could be a standout skill piece there in the National Hockey League. But at number 12, we have one of the bigger risers of this year's draft class, and that's Brady Martin of the Sioux Greyhounds. And personally, this is a bit on the lower end of his range. We debated him significantly higher than this, all the way up to like 9th or 10th overall. And I think personally on my own board, that's probably closer to where he falls. But we had to kind of make some concessions here. And do we take the big swing on elite skill with guys like O'Brien and Carbonneau, or do you go for the more projectable, physical, two-way brilliance of Brady Martin, where he brings this intensity, but he also brings standout creativity and deftness with the puck on his stick, the handling skill, the shot? These are really great elements in his game, and he's a player that I think has every right to also be a top 10 selection at the NHL draft if that ends up being the case. But I would not be shocked if that were to happen, considering that he is such a physical center with a real skill as well in his toolkit. But at 13th overall, we have a significant faller here on our board in Anton Frondell, a player who is pretty much a top 5 or top 7 consensus player with most outlets, and he's going to go in that range on draft day. I'd be shocked if he didn't. But we still have him here at 13 because we don't see the same level of upside as other scouts do. We see a player who, yes, has a standout shot. The shot is a clear NHL level projection. It's one of the best shots in the entire draft class. That one timer on the power play is a weapon, if nothing else. He also brings standout ability in the defensive zone. We do think it's maybe slightly overrated at this point, but he's a really hardworking, intelligent defensive player who's in possession. He applies pressure, really capable in terms of stick lifts and poke checks and being disruptive defensively, both in his own zone and while on the back check. But the big drawback with Frondell is that he's pretty much a net negative in terms of transition impact at this stage in his career. He's not a player that really contributes much off the rush at all. He lags behind in terms of foot speed because he drops very low defensively. He's often like 2 or 3 seconds behind his wingers and entering the offensive zone. And it's a bit of a sacrifice he makes to this play style that he adopts, but it really limits how involved he can be offensively. And while his play on the cycle in terms of shooting and getting in front of the net and being physical and all these different aspects is quite refined, that transition game in terms of the modern NHL, if that isn't there, a top 6 role could be difficult to achieve for this player. So that element of doubt is why he's lower and he's in our teens, but we definitely understand the reasoning for having him much higher. He's projectable. He's going to play minutes. He's going to be a guy in the NHL within a couple of years' time. It's not going to take all that long, but still a player who definitely has other counterparts in this year's class who have more clear upside in our valuation. But moving on at 14th, we have Lynden Lakovic, another player with real upside who also had a lot of arguments higher up than 14th here. This range was very tightly fought in our meeting, but Lynden Lakovic ends up here at 14th overall, a very skilled player, brings playmaking and handling and scoring gift. And on top of that is really increasing his game in terms of adaptability and versatility and dynamism with the puck on his stick in the offensive zone, brings a real level of engagement as well, pretty high motor, but not the most physical of players. And at 6'4", that's something that holds him back in terms of where he's rising to in draft rankings. But if you were to evaluate him as a soft skill player first and foremost, rather than a potential power forward, I think there's a reason to take him as high as like 9th or 10th overall in this year's class. A very skilled player who has some similarities to guys like Matthew Boldy of the Minnesota Wild. I think there's real upside here with Lakovic. But at 15, we have Radim Mrtka, the 6'5", 6'6" right shot defenseman from the Seattle Thunderbirds in the WHL. Big, rangy, mobile, very strong defensively, very good instincts, good gap management, aggressive in terms of positioning without giving up the middle of the ice or abandoning his position in terms of like chasing a hit or anything. And also shown a lot more upside in terms of his offensive activations as the years progressed. My guess is that he's a pretty much lock to go top 10 on draft day. He's a bit lower on our board, I think, because the overall offensive upside is a bit more limited than other players in this range. And we see him, I guess, mainly as a number 4 projection at the NHL level, though on my own personal board, he is pretty much in my top 10 because I see him as a very projectable top 4 piece who brings all of these very important elements that only increase in value come playoff time. At 16th, staying with the Seattle Thunderbirds, there's Braeden Cootes, very hardworking, dynamic center, was driving a lot of offense there for Seattle this season, very skilled handler, pacey playmaker, but more than anything, just a dog on the forecheck, on the back check. It doesn't matter. He's hardworking and a guy that I think is going to make a lot of noise at the NHL level and surprise some people with just how skilled and projectable his game is, because he just isn't ranked quite this high on most boards. At number 17, we have Logan Hensler of the University of Wisconsin, a smooth skating right shot defenseman who took really big steps as the year progressed in terms of taking on a bigger offensive workload, but also being a lot more controlled in his rush defending, using that skating as a plus level tool to just suffocate rushes and to keep very tight gaps, has an active stick, layered stick and body quite effectively later on in the campaign. And I thought that in less than ideal circumstances there with Wisconsin this year, where limitations both in offense and structure on that team, I thought that Hensler did a really good job at catching himself at the midway point and really showing that he has some second pairing upside at the NHL level. At 18th overall, we had the most violent defenseman in this year's class, Kashawn Aitcheson of the Barrie Colts, another player I covered in a scouting report video very recently, which you can go and check out if you want to have a full deep dive of his game. But basically, he's an incredibly violent, physical left shot defenseman, skates quite well, has an absolute howitzer of a shot, and is just very aggressive on both sides of the puck. He got burned a couple times, and the decision-making needs a little bit of fine-tuning, but overall a player with some real NHL-style tools and a guy who's going to see his value balloon even a little bit more after the NHL teams watch these playoffs and the Florida Panthers run to the finals. And I think he's just going to go inside that top 15, top 12 range on draft day. At number 19, we have Cameron Reid, an undersized left shot defenseman who skates like the wind, makes very intelligent reads on both sides of the puck, and brings a real level of offensive activation, intelligence, and dynamism with a puck on the stick. A guy who's quite versatile and adaptable, but really shown as a puck mover and a play killer as well against the rush. I really liked his rush defending in terms of matching footwork, really keeping his gaps tight. He's a player that I think has a lot of runway as well in terms of accessing higher ceilings than he's shown so far in his career. But to wrap up this segment, we have Benjamin Kindel of the Calgary Hitmen, a center and winger who just was second in the entire CHL among draft eligibles in scoring this season with 99 points, and was part of a two-man show with Oliver Talk there leading the offense in Calgary, playing a massive role in building plays. He's a real manipulator and play creator and puppet master with the puck on his stick, a guy who loves to create through his playmaking ability, can pick passes, very skilled puck handler. I think the skating and physicality combination needs some work, but in terms of getting his frame and his profile to an NHL level, give him a couple of years to refine and fill out, and I think he'll get there. And on top of that, he just brings that standout, both thinking of the game and that skill to then make the most of that high-end thinking of the game. But that wraps up the second segment. In the next one, we're going to wrap up the show with picks 21 through 32. But first, a quick message from our sponsors here at Locked On NHL Prospects. All righty, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, breaking down our top 32 rankings at Elite Prospects. And again, we're breaking down some standouts outside the first round in tomorrow's episode. But to kick things off here at 21, we have Malcolm Spence of the Erie Otters, a hardworking left winger who's very projectable to the pro game. He looks like a pro in terms of how he's built, like 6'2", over 200 pounds. He's old for the draft class and just project as a great complementary middle six piece who can work hard, chip in offensively. He's an above average skater, above average playmaker, above average physical player, just really good across the board. And I think that an NHL team can get very excited about the opportunity of drafting him in that 15 to 22 range. At 22, we do have Cameron Schmidt of the Vancouver Giants, potentially the most skilled player from this point onwards in our entire rankings. Just a really, really gifted, dynamic player with the puck on his stick, the fastest player in the entire CHL this season, even at 5'7". He has some really good physical habits in terms of getting to the middle of the ice, gaining leverage over stronger opponents, keeping his feet moving. He's a very hardworking, high motor player who brings elite level shooting ability, elite level skating ability, elite level handling ability, and nearly elite level playmaking as well. Across the board, a very skilled player and another guy who I have an entire scouting report on here on the channel. At 23, we have Blake Fiddler of the Edmonton Oil Kings, a mobile right shot defenseman who at 6'4", over 200 pounds, and being a July, I believe, birthday in this year's class, is a very young player with a bunch of runway who moves well, is physical, defends the rush brilliantly, and has shown a real high-end degree in terms of breakout artistry. He's a very smart player on retrievals, getting the puck out of the zone with control, and just killing plays against the rush as well. He's a rush specialist at this point and still has to kind of diversify diversify his game a bit more beyond just that, but a very solid foundation to build from. At 24, we have Joshua Ravensbergen, the only goaltender in our first round and the only goaltender in our first 2 rounds in our rankings. From the Prince George Cougars, a big, toolsy goaltender who thinks the game well, tracks pucks very well, is athletic in his cross-ice movements, and overall just looks like your typical NHL starting goaltender. Not a player with like that elite level goaltending potential necessarily, but certainly a guy who's probably going to be playing minutes in the NHL for a very long time and being reliable throughout there. Think of him as a guy that you can rotate in a 1A, 1B situation. Where he ends up between that 1A or 1B level remains to be seen, but definitely a useful goaltender for a team to add here at the draft. At 25th, we have Cole Reschny of the Victoria Royals, a player who scored loads of points, especially down the stretch this season, was dominant through the playoffs and at the U18 World Championships there for Team Canada, and a guy who's just able to bring a lot of playmaking ability from the periphery, from the wing, but still a player that's going to have to bring a bit more of a middle drive to the equation, especially if he wants to keep playing at center. Once he goes to the professional level, he's going to have to be able to create these plays from the middle lane, from in tight, and be a bit less reliant on his speed and overall playmaking creativity to create the plays for him. And he's going to have to diversify a little bit, but definitely a guy with standout skill in this range of the draft. At 26th overall, we have Vaclav Nestrasil of the Muskegon Lumberjacks, a player I've loved all season long. My top USHL draft eligible here this season, and a guy I also have an entire scouting report here on the channel that I will link in the cards up above. Just a tremendous talent, a guy that brings a real level of power game at 6'6", 190 pounds. He still has a lot of filling out to do, but he's engaged a lot more physically this season than he previously has in his career. And he brings high-end handling and playmaking ability to the equation as well. And I think that his shot's also an unheralded part of his game. There's real quality there throughout. He works hard. He's got that motor. He's got the physicality. He's got runway. And he was just a very big part of a championship-winning team there in Muskegon. And he's off to UMass in the NCAA next season, and I think he's going to look great there against college competition. At 27th overall, we have Shane Vansaghi of the Michigan State University. They are the Spartans, and he's a player who we have ranked here in the first round, but is going to just be a bottom 6 specialist. He brings standout, and I truly do mean standout physicality and engagement. He's an absolute like workhorse and a machine of a player. And even though he lacks the same kind of like middle 6, top 6 upside as other guys in this range, he's a shoe-in to play NHL minutes and to be really valuable, and only more so come playoff time. So a player that we have here as a first-round talent. At 28, we have Bill Zonnon of the Rouyn-Noranda Huskies in the QMJHL, a guy who moved from the wing to center here this season. And even though his skating is subpar, he brings real standout attributes in terms of his physicality, his work rate, and his playmaking skill. And that trifecta has been a really strong component of his game here all season long, and definitely a player to keep an eye on if your team is drafting in the 20 range. At 29, we have Jack Murtagh of the NTDP, our top-ranked player from the program, and he is a high-motor winger who brings a real level of goal-scoring gift, one of the better shots in this year's class, but on top of that, has standout elements in his physicality, and his playmaking game also grew a significant amount this campaign, and you just know what you're going to get with Murtagh night in, night out in terms of two-way energy and intensity, and he's a guy that I think will be able to really gain chemistry well with a two-way center at the next level. At 30th overall, we have Cullen Potter of Arizona State University, who we just did a scouting report on with Mark from NHL Draft Pros. So definitely go check that out. A player who brings some of the best skating in this entire draft class. And on top of that, really grew into a two-way kind of game this season in the NCAA. After being expected to be playing with the NTDP U18s this campaign, he decided to jump a level and just go straight to the NCAA, and it's paying off for him. He really grew his game in ways that he was being questioned before this campaign began this season. So definitely a player worth looking at in that like latter half of the first round, this might even be the lower end of his range. The upside is quite entertaining with this player. I think that a second line capacity could certainly be reached in his play if he really reaches his upside. But to wrap up the show, we have a pair of big defensemen, and these are the first players in this episode who are B grades in our valuations. The first 30 were all A grade talents who for us are clearly like first round caliber players. And this is kind of that cutoff where we're getting into that second round range. But we have two players left here in the first round. And first we have Max Psenicka of the Portland Winterhawks, a big 6'4" right shot defenseman who really shone this season, playing also internationally at the U18 Worlds, but more than anything, they're in the WHL with Portland in terms of combining physicality, mobility, activation habits, great give and go plays off the rush, and overall a defenseman was able to do a bit of everything in a very big role in his rookie campaign here in North America. But last but not least, we have one more player from my neck of the woods in the USHL, and that's Jacob Rombach, the massive, like 6'6" left shot defenseman from the Lincoln Stars who plays a really good play killing game. This is a guy who has an active stick, very good defensive habits, and overall is just a reliable piece in his own zone. And on top of that, still has a lot of runway in terms of leveraging his physicality in terms of creating advantages down low in the defensive zone. So a guy I see that could really grow into a number 4 role in the NHL. And that's why he cracked our top 32, especially because he adds in a standout attribute in his retrieval game, a very deceptive player on retrievals who shoulder scans constantly and makes sound decisions under pressure. And that combined with that play killing ability makes him a very projectable talent in our eyes. But that wraps up the show here for today. Again, the entire draft guide is going to be linked in the description down below. Please do go check that out. So much work went into that this season. And that's everything here for me today. If you're watching on YouTube, let me know what your thoughts are on these rankings. I'm sure that a couple things here are going to spark some disagreements and discussions in the comments down below. I'm sure especially our rankings of guys like Anton Frondell might see some criticism, but I'd love to hear your thoughts and your perspectives as well in that comment section down below if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always appreciated. And for your second listen, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything that you need to know to build yourself a competitive and sustainable fantasy roster. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects, and I look forward to catching you tuning in again very, very soon.